it makes it an especially compelling DNA sample, right? If they are mixed. And we see that a lot with suspects and victims, that there is mixed blood or mixed other type of biological material.
There is a number at the center of this investigation. It is not a name. It is not a date. It is not a count of the days since Nancy Guthrie was reported missing from her home in the Catalina foothills. It is a percentage, a ratio of genetic material sitting inside a laboratory in Florida. Material that, according to publicly available reports, investigators believe may have been left behind by the person who appeared on that doorbell camera at 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, and what the world's leading forensic genealogist just said about that number. After more than 66 days of silence from the laboratory, after weeks of careful public statements, after the entire forensic community watched the clock and waited for results that never came, was not what anyone connected to this case wanted to hear. This video is based on publicly available reports and expert discussion surrounding this case. All analysis is opinion and does not constitute established fact. We pull the files. We go where the evidence points. And tonight the evidence points to a scientific assessment that may be the most significant public statement made about this investigation in months. Stay with us, because the context surrounding that assessment, the science behind it, the pathway it closes, and the pathway it opens, changes how this entire investigation needs to be understood going forward. According to publicly available reports, DNA was recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. Based on statements from Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos, that material does not belong to Nancy and does not match anyone in close contact with her. According to available report, there was no match in CODIS, the National Criminal DNA Database, holding profiles on approximately 20 million convicted offenders. When that news reached the forensic community, the initial response was, according to available reports, immediate and consistent. Experienced genealogists appeared to say the same thing in similar language. If investigators have the kidnapper's DNA, this case could potentially be solvable. Not eventually, not in a decade, but possibly soon. The databases exist. The technology has been proven in case after case. Move quickly, run the sample, and a name could potentially emerge. C.C. Moore is the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs. According to publicly available records, she has personally helped contribute to solving more than 300 cold cases using nothing but DNA and genealogical databases. She went on the record early in this investigation, before the full complications were understood, in her own words to multiple media outlets. She expressed that if she were in the suspect's position, she would be extremely concerned, because using investigative genetic genealogy, identification could potentially happen. She described a scenario where, if the suspect had deep roots in the United States, if his family tree had been in this country for generations, identification could potentially happen relatively quickly. She said she had been waiting and hoping for exactly this kind of evidence to surface in this case. That was February. By late February, the tone had shifted. According to publicly available statements, Sheriff Nanos returned to cameras and used a single word that, according to forensic analysts, significantly altered the trajectory of the forensic case: mixture. The DNA sample recovered from inside Nancy's home was, according to Nanos' public statements, not a clean, isolated profile. It was described as a mixture, multiple people's genetic material overlapping in a single sample, tangled together in a way that reportedly turned what investigators had hoped might be a breakthrough into what Nanos called, in public statements, a biological puzzle that could take time to decipher. When the forensic community heard that description, according to available reports, the immediate question was about the nature of the complexity. How complex is this mixture? The answer, when it eventually became clearer through available public statements and expert commentary, was more significant than anything that had been said publicly up to that point. C.C. Moore, in subsequent public appearances, classified the sample using a specific forensic term. She described it as a complex mixture, not a simple one. According to her public statement, there appeared to be at least two unknown contributors beyond Nancy herself. Not a straightforward sample where Nancy's DNA and one unknown male contributor could be separated with established techniques. Something more complicated, she said, in her own words across multiple public appearances, that there appeared to be multiple DNA contributors that were unknown in that sample. Understanding why that matters requires understanding how investigative genetic genealogy actually works and what it requires to function. CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, is, according to public records, the FBI's national database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders and certain arrestees. It holds, according to available available figures, nearly 20 million offender profiles. According to available reporting, the Guthrie DNA has been through CODIS. The result was no match on whoever may have left that biological material inside Nancy's home appears, based on available information, to have no qualifying criminal record in the federal system. Traditional law enforcement database matching is, according to available analysis, not likely to resolve this case through that pathway. Investigative genetic genealogy works on an entirely different principle and requires an entirely different type of DNA profile. Instead of matching against known offender record, genetic genealogists create what is an instant profile, a single nucleotide polymorphism profile. If a traditional CODIS profile is, to use an analogy, like a rough sketch of someone's face, enough to confirm an identity if you already have the person in custody, then an SMP profile is closer to a full architectural blueprint of their genetic heritage. It captures not just who they are, but who their ancestors were and, by extension, who their living relatives might be. This is the kind of profile generated by consumer ancestry tests. The tests that, according to available estimates, tens of millions of Americans have taken to find cousins, trace immigration patterns, or discover ethnic backgrounds. Once that SME profile exists for an unknown suspect, according to available methodology descriptions, it can be uploaded to publicly accessible genealogy databases, not law enforcement databases, but consumer platforms where people have voluntarily submitted their own ancestry data and chosen to make it searchable. The algorithm does not look for the suspect directly. According to available descriptions of the process, it looks for people who share DNA with the suspect. Cousins, second cousins, third cousins, distant relatives sharing a common ancestor somewhere in the family tree. Anyone in the database who carries enough overlapping genetic material to indicate a shared ancestor. From those matches, the genealogist builds a family tree, branch by branch, ancestor by ancestor. The investigator maps each match to their known relatives, traces those relatives back through historical record, and identifies where all those separate branches might converge. Converging on a person of the right biological sex, the right approximate age, the right geographic history, to plausibly be the individual investigators are looking for. C.C. Moore described this process to CNN as, in her words, reverse engineering someone's identity through their family tree based on their DNA alone, piecing the suspect's tree back together ancestor by ancestor based on who he may be sharing DNA with. This technique is, according to available records, what helped identify Joseph James DeAngelo as the suspected Golden State Killer, a case that had remained unsolved for over 4 decades. It reportedly contributed to the identification of a suspect in the Idaho murders case as well. The technique is documented, proven, legally tested, and can be relatively rapid when the conditions are right, but it requires one foundational thing before any of it can begin: a viable SNP profile. You cannot upload a mixture to a genealogy database. You cannot upload noise. You cannot ask a database to find relatives of a genetic signal that is tangled inside competing contributors. The deconvolution, the mathematical and computational process of separating the mixed sample into clean individual genetic profiles, has to happen first. It has to succeed, and the resulting profile has to meet a minimum threshold of genetic markers to produce meaningful genealogy matches. If the deconvolution fails, according to available analysis, nothing moves. The genealogist has nothing to upload. The databases remain untouched. The family tree is never built. A name is never reached through this pathway. There is also, according to available reporting, an access problem that rarely receives adequate attention. The 3 largest consumer DNA databases in the world, Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, and MyHeritage, together hold, according to available estimates, more than 50 million profiles combined. According to available reporting, all 3 have, for reasons of business and privacy policy, declined law enforcement access to their data. The databases that are reportedly open to law enforcement include GeneMatch, Family Tree DNA, and C.C. Moore's own platform, DNA Justice. Together, according to available figures, these hold fewer than 2 million profiles, 50 million versus 2 million. Those are, according to available analysis, the numbers investigators are reportedly working against. The vast majority of the consumer genetic data that could theoretically assist in identifying a suspect is, according to available reports, sitting behind walls that law enforcement cannot currently access. The universe they can legally search is reportedly a fraction of what would be needed for the technique to work reliably across all population groups. Even within that accessible universe, according to available analysis, coverage is reportedly unequal, with people of certain ancestry backgrounds overrepresented and others potentially not appearing in available databases at all. Forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick, who spoke to NBC News in the weeks following Nancy's disappearance, according to available reports, described the mathematical reality as follows. Suppose the mixture inside Nancy's home breaks down as approximately 90% Nancy's DNA and 10% from an unknown contributor. 90% of the genetic material in that sample would belong to the victim who lived in that house for years, and 10%, if that hypothetical holds, might belong to the person investigators are looking for. According to Fitzpatrick's public statement, that ratio might not be sufficient. The laboratory might not be able to extract enough markers from a 10% minor contributor to build a profile that meets the genealogy threshold. In her words, this could be very difficult. And then she raised the second variable, the one that potentially transforms a challenging situation into something closer to a scientific obstacle. What if it is not a two-person mixture? According to available reporting, Sheriff Nanos did not describe this sample as a two-person mixture. His specific public language was, in his own words, a mixed mixture of DNA. The phrasing, according to forensic analysts, does not necessarily mean two contributors. It could suggest three. It could suggest four or more. A space where a potentially violent event occurred. A space that was the primary residence of the victim for years. A space that may have been accessed by multiple individuals at different points. All of that biological material can't, according to available scientific explanation, converge in a single sample collected from a single surface. When a sample contains, according to available analysis, two contributors and the ratio between them is reasonably clear, computational models can potentially assign each detected genetic marker to its most probable contributor with sufficient statistical confidence to produce a workable profile. When you add a third unknown contributor, according to available forensic science description, the probability model reportedly becomes dramatically more complex. Every marker now has to be assigned across three simultaneous probability distributions. The confidence interval for each assignment widens. The error rate on individual assignments increases. A fourth unknown contributor does not simply double that complexity, according to available analysis. The problem reportedly compounds in ways that place increasing demands on available software. CC Moore, across multiple public appearances, according to available reports, confirmed the seriousness of the mixture problem. She classified it using the forensic term complex mixture, and then, according to available reporting, she said something that changed the entire frame of the conversation. She said, in her own words, that based on what she was observing about the timeline and the absence of results, the software currently available to the laboratory and the FBI appeared to be not equal to the problem. She said they appeared to be hoping that things would change in the coming months or years. When pressed directly on whether the technology might not even exist to solve this specific sample, according to available reporting, her response was direct. The software, she suggested, simply might not exist, at least not in a form that DNA Labs International and available FBI tools currently have access to. She connected this to the broader developmental history of the field. Deconvolution techniques for traditional STR profiles, the kind used in CODIS, have, according to available history, been refined over approximately 30 years. The software is mature, widely available, and well-tested in courtrooms. SNP profiling for investigative genetic genealogy is, according to available descriptions, fundamentally different and significantly newer. The bioinformatic pipeline that takes a complex mixed sample and produces a clean individual SNP profile suitable for genealogy database work is, in Moore's own words, starting from almost the beginning because it is still relatively new compared to the other type of DNA profiling that has been worked with for decades. That gap between the maturity of CODIS deconvolution tools and the current state of SNP deconvolution software is, according to available analysis, exactly what this investigation appears to have encountered. And then CC Moore said the thing that, according to available reporting, no one connected to this investigation wanted to hear. In her public assessment, she suggested that the home sample could be, in her own words, pretty unlikely to ever be the evidence that solves this case. From the woman who has, according to public records, helped contribute to solving more than 300 of these investigations. From the woman who expressed in February that she was extremely hopeful the moment she heard unknown DNA had reportedly been found inside that house. From the person described as the world's leading forensic genealogist, the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, who pioneered this field and has applied it to some of the most difficult cold cases available, pretty unlikely to ever be the evidence. Those words carry weight that is difficult to overstate, because this is not a commentator. This is not a television legal analyst offering opinion. This is according to available records on the person best positioned in the entire country to evaluate whether a specific piece of forensic evidence is workable. And she has said clearly that if the parameters are what the available evidence suggests they may be, the home sample may have reached the current boundary of what available science can do with it. None. But, and this is where the assessment shifts entirely, that is not where C.C. Moore stopped. Immediately after acknowledging the possible limitation of the existing sample, immediately after articulating the scenario in which a minor contributor ratio inside a complex mixture could place this evidence beyond the reach of current software, she pivoted to something specific. She said, according to available reporting, that Nancy had to have been held somewhere. And if there is a second crime scene that is discovered that gives investigators another opportunity to find DNA, this is not a platitude. This is not a vague gesture toward possibility offered to soften a difficult assessment. According to available forensic science descriptions, this is a real, documented, scientifically grounded alternative pathway, one that is not blocked by the software problem, not blocked by the mixture complexity, and not blocked by the sample ratio that has reportedly stalled the current evidence. Wherever Nancy Guthrie may be, wherever she may have been taken after she was reportedly removed from that house in the Catalina foothills, that location is potentially a crime scene. A vehicle is potentially a crime scene. A secondary location is potentially a crime scene. Any surface where the suspect spent time is, according to available analysis, a potential deposit of biological material that the existing laboratory problem would not necessarily apply to. The specific problem with the home sample, according to available forensic analysis, is this. Nancy's DNA is not just in that sample because of the reported crime. It is in that sample because she lived there. Every surface she touched across years and years of daily life, every strand of hair, every biological trace left across decades of occupying that space. Her genetic signature is reportedly woven so deeply into the fabric of that house that any foreign contributor, anyone who was not supposed to be there, is, according to available analysis, trying to be seen through the densest possible biological background of the victim's own DNA. The suspect reportedly spent approximately 40 minutes in that space. According to available information, Nancy spent years there. A second location inverts that equation entirely. A vehicle the suspect may have driven reportedly has primarily his DNA. A secondary location where he may have been would reportedly not be saturated with decades of Nancy's biological presence. His deposits in those spaces would not, according to available analysis, be competing with years of Nancy's life. Moore said explicitly, according to available reporting, if investigators can get a viable profile from the actual kidnapper, he could potentially be identified through investigative genetic genealogy. She said she believed something would eventually be found in that manner, and that there was likely a second crime scene, possibly a third. Nancy had to be transported. She had to be somewhere. Every point of transit and every location where the suspect may have spent time is, according to available analysis, a potential deposit of biological material that the existing laboratory problem does not necessarily apply to. Moore also made a second recommendation, according to available reporting, that investigators may or may not have fully executed. She urged authorities to consider returning to the Guthrie home and re-swabbing, even after the house was reportedly returned to the family. She said DNA is, in her words, actually pretty hardy, that it can persist on surfaces longer than people might assume, and that biological material invisible to the naked eye can potentially be enough to build a case with today's tools. She pointed to a specific detail from the publicly available doorbell footage. According to her public statements, the suspect appears to have been holding a Bite flashlight, a tactical flashlight reportedly held in the mouth, during the time he was at the front of the property. He was reportedly there for approximately 40 minutes. Her public assessment was that she doubted he kept that flashlight in his mouth for the full 40 minutes. If he removed it at any point, according to her analysis, he would immediately have had his DNA, through saliva, on the outside of his glove. Saliva DNA is, according to available forensic science descriptions, among the richest and most reliable biological sources for analysis. If he removed that flashlight at any point, if he breathed without the mask fully covering his face, according to available analysis, he may have left biological material that could potentially still be on a surface in that house that was not swabbed on the first pass. Moore's public statement was direct. DNA is actually pretty hardy, and she believes that if investigators have not collected his DNA, it is still potentially at that crime scene somewhere. and they should consider revisiting it. There is one more institutional detail that deserves to be stated clearly according to available public records. According to publicly available reporting, Sheriff Nanos reportedly chose to send the DNA to DNA Labs International, a private laboratory in Florida, rather than accepting what was described as the FBI's offer to process it at Quantico. Former U.S. Surgeon General Richard Carmona, who formerly held leadership at the Pima County Sheriff's Department, stated publicly, according to available reports, that the FBI laboratory at Quantico is described as the best forensic facility in the country and is available to local agencies at no cost. CC Moore, when asked about this choice, took a more measured public position. She reportedly indicated that DNA Labs International has specific SNE profiling capability that the FBI may not have fully in-house, and that the choice reportedly allowed CODIS analysis and SNP profiling to run simultaneously, which could in theory have saved time. Whether that institutional decision was the correct one is, according to available analysis, a question that cannot yet be definitively answered. What is publicly documented is where the evidence currently sits and what has and has not reportedly happened with it over the course of this investigation. According to available public records, the Pima County Deputies Organization, representing the sheriff's own deputies, reportedly issued a unanimous no-confidence vote against Sheriff Nanos on March 24th. The Pima County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously, according to available reports, to require Nanos to answer questions under oath. A recall effort is reportedly active. Former U.S. Surgeon General Carmona stated publicly, according to available reports, that the crime scene was, in his words, permanently corrupted, stating that once a crime scene has been corrupted, that is the end of it, because you cannot reconstitute a crime scene. Nanos has disputed these characterizations publicly. He said he had no regrets about decisions he or his team made. He described criticisms as, in his words, just silly. These are, according to available public records, the documented, verified facts of what the institutional scrutiny around this investigation currently looks like. It is 66 days since Nancy Guthrie was reported missing. According to available reports, Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show anchor desk on April 6, 2026, wearing yellow. According to available reporting, she later stepped outside the Rockefeller Center where a crowd had gathered, and she reportedly fought back tears. Her mother has not been found. The investigation, according to available reports, remains active. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has described it as, according to publicly available statements, a specialized task force assigned specifically to pursue remaining leads long-term. The FBI reportedly remains involved. According to available reporting, the glove found approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home, which had briefly appeared to visually match the gloves worn by the suspect in the doorbell footage, was reportedly traced to a restaurant employee with no connection to the case. The mixed DNA from inside the home reportedly remains at DNA Labs International in Florida. As of available reporting, according to public information, the deconvolution has not reportedly succeeded. The SNP profile has not reportedly been produced. The genealogy databases have not reportedly been accessed through this pathway. The identity of the masked figure on the doorbell camera remains publicly unknown. And yet, according to available analysis, the science has not exhausted every possibility it has. Moore was explicit about this in her public statements. The second crime scene, wherever Nancy may be or may have been, carries, according to her assessment, the potential for clean, uncontaminated biological material that none of the current sample's complications would necessarily apply to. The re-swab she reportedly recommended may potentially produce deposits that original evidence collection missed. The deconvolution software that does not reportedly exist today may exist in 6 months or a year in a form that could retroactively make the home sample more useful. The databases that reportedly hold fewer than 2 million profiles today may grow, especially if people respond to Moore's public appeal, according to available reports, to download their raw ancestry data and upload it to GDmatch or Family Tree DNA. A single upload from a single relative of the suspect could potentially be the one that changes the trajectory of this case. And beyond the forensic science, there is the human element that investigations of this kind ultimately depend on. Someone may know something. The suspect did not materialize from thin air and disappear back into it. He reportedly planned this operation with specific knowledge of Nancy's home, her schedule, her neighborhood, her routines. He reportedly sourced equipment, wore specific gear, and appeared on that doorbell footage for approximately 40 minutes. That level of reported preparation does not happen in silence. According to available analysis, someone may have seen something. Someone may have sold him something. Someone may have heard something. The DNA evidence from inside Nancy's home may still be at some future point part of how this case is resolved. If the science advances, if the software is developed, if the sample can be revisited, or it may not be. The most honest public assessment from the most qualified expert reportedly available in this field is that, at current technical limits, this specific sample alone is, in her words, pretty unlikely to be the evidence that closes this case. But this investigation has not reportedly reached the end of its evidence. It has reportedly reached the end of one pathway, and the science, like Nancy's family, like the investigators still reportedly assigned to find her, like the journalists and genealogists and forensic scientists watching this case from every discipline, is still working. If you have information about the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, anything at all, please contact 1-800-CAL-FBI, tips.fbi.com. Pima County Sheriff's Department, 520-351-4900, combined reward, $1.2 million, anonymous Stu, turn on notifications. Because when something breaks in this case, you will hear it here first.